Right now, there are more people on Facebook than there were on the planet 200 years ago. Humanity's greatest desire is to belong and connect. And now we see each other. We hear each other.
Grandpa, I love you. I love you.
Well, I want to take a picture.
We share what we love, and it reminds us what we all have in common.
Dug out alive and well after 7.5 days.
If you believe in yourself, you will know how to ride a bike. Rock and roll!
So now technically your device is on. Can you tell? Oh, that's exciting!
And this connection is changing the way the world works. Governments are trying to keep up.
No, we can't test the freedom.
And older generations are concerned.
Many people are very concerned about tomorrow.
They could get worse next year.
The game has new rules. The next 27 minutes are an experiment. But in order for it to work, you have to pay attention.
Now I have a question for you, to see if you're paying attention. And my first question is, does anyone in this room know who Joseph Kony is? If you do, can you put up your hands? Okay, so we have maybe 2/3 of the room. Now this is a very informed room, and most of you probably heard about Joseph Kony for the first time after hearing about or hearing indirectly from this video. This was a video posted by an organization called Invisible Children, and it was one of the most viral videos in its political campaign form. It went over 100 million views, and it created a political storm. It actually brought Joseph Kony into the political conversation when he had been a forgotten dictator, or a forgotten warlord that had kind of drifted off the news page. Now, the reason he became famous is because of this video. And for those of you who were paying attention, what you just saw was actually the first 30 seconds of the Kony 2012 video. And what's really interesting about this video is actually it breaks most of the rules of viral marketing and communication. It's 29 minutes long, when most people will tell you that you need to keep it short. It doesn't talk about its subject at the beginning. It doesn't get straight to the point. It builds a story, and yet it worked. And it worked so well that I heard about it from my kids. I have 2 children, Ivan, who's 14, and Natasha, who's 12. And they came up to me after watching this video that they had heard about through their friends, and they said, "This guy is terrible. We have to do something." And if you watched the video and you went to the website, there was a whole campaign. And you could join by downloading images, printing your own posters, and buying the t-shirt. But as a good digital consultant, I needed to investigate. I needed to find out, what's behind this story. And I started to Google this and try and look at different stories, and it was quite complicated. The organization Invisible Children had a kind of slightly strange background. There were Christian undertones, and it looked like it could be some fundamentalist organization. There were also issues about their funding. So obviously, then you had a backlash with people saying this video shouldn't be supported. And I pondered on this, and I'll come back to my conclusion at the end of this presentation. But this kind of video is part of a new phenomenon of political movements that come out of nowhere. In Turkey, a few years back, we had a protest that started because they were going to build a shopping mall in a park that people loved. They started to protest, they created Facebook pages, they got together, they shared information with each other, and suddenly a movement was born. And this, of course, echoed the Arab Spring. This is a picture of Tahrir Square on the day Hosni Mubarak stepped down. This was the end of a dictatorship that had lasted for 40 years. And what was most incredible is that nobody had seen it coming. And we thought, when we're watching that, you feel optimistic. It's kind of people power. It's a new form of democracy. But of course, there are other sides to it. And if you looked at London, a few months later, we had riots that took everyone by surprise again. These riots also were using social media to connect, and they were getting people together, sharing their frustration and their anger over problems that they were able to quickly disseminate. Now, these different stories have two strange birds in common, and I'd like to share my theory about the weird birds. The first one is a black swan. Now, how many people heard about the expression a black swan? If you can put up your hands. Okay, so about a quarter of the room. Now, a black swan is an expression that goes all the way back to antiquity. And it used to mean an aberration of nature, something that's impossible. This is what it meant when you were writing in Latin and Greek poetry. And then a Dutch explorer who went to Australia came across a living black swan. And that kind of flipped the metaphor. From being something that's impossible, it became something that we think is impossible until we see it happen. And what we're experiencing today is an increasing number of black swans. And if you go back to the Arab Spring, right until it happened, people had no clue this would happen. They didn't know it was even possible. You ask the experts in Washington, in Europe, everywhere around the world, they didn't predict this because we don't understand the new rules of the game. And the second bird is a smaller one, symbolized by Twitter. And it's a weird little bird. And it's funny the kind of reactions you get about Twitter. The Prime Minister of Turkey said that Twitter was the worst thing to happen to civilized society. I mean, worse than floods, worse than earthquakes, worse than death. I mean, it's kind of a bizarre overreaction. But Twitter irritates authoritarian rulers. It just doesn't seem to sit with their idea of the world. Now, as communicators, as digital consultants, we're looking at this and we're trying to understand what's going on. And with a kind of nice, scientific approach, we decided to map it out in an equation, the equation to understand why this is all happening. And I'm going to share this with you right now, so pay attention. The first bit of this equation is that information is power. And most of us believe that. If you're in communication especially, this is something that's been an age-old idea. The second part is that the internet is now the ultimate source of information. And the third part, the conclusion, is that the internet is now the ultimate source of power. This is perfectly logical, by the way. But it's not just power to overthrow government. It's not military power. It's something much deeper than that. It's the power to shape perception. Because if you shape perception, you change behavior. And if you change behavior, you can change the world. So this is the new world we live in. And it's changing everything. And the companies that understand this are the ones that are redefining the rules of the industry in which they operate. They're creating new industries. If you look at these players, Google is obviously a lot more than a search engine. Google is changing our relationship with information, with the external world. And it's the biggest advertising agency in the world. So it's touching a whole range of different things. Facebook is redefining our notion of friendship, our notion of relationships. So these are not just new tech startups. These are companies that are changing everything around us. And if you look at the political world, you have what I call the new establishment. NGOs have been the first organizations to embrace the internet. And they didn't do it because they had read a study by McKinsey telling them to use digital channels. They did it because they didn't have enough money to compete in traditional media. They couldn't buy the kind of campaigns that the organizations they were fighting could. And as a result of that, they fell back on the web. They said, well, it's quite cheap. You can send millions of emails. You can create web pages. But suddenly something strange happened. it started to work. And it started to work better than the campaigns that were orchestrated by companies throwing millions of dollars, because customers don't believe the stories that are told to them in that form. So there was a shift that took place. We saw this in the H1N1 crisis. This was the biggest crisis to hit the pharmaceutical industry in 2009. And when we studied this in a bit more depth, we found some incredible things. We found that on Google, it was the second or first story in the news cycle for the whole year. And when you looked at Facebook and Twitter, for those years, they published their reports. These were the first or second most used words in people's status. So it was something that triggered an incredible amount of conversations. And certain people used the internet as an echo chamber, and they were pushing messages that were spreading fear. Because on the web, as you well know, scary stories spread like wildfire. To give you an example, there's a best-selling author called Tony Robbins. Who knows Tony Robbins in this room? Okay, so he's an NLP guru, and he walks on coal, burning coal, and he has a number of other tricks up his sleeve, but he's not really a medical expert. And yet, he tweeted to his followers about the H1N1 crisis and the swine flu vaccine. At the time, he had 1.5 million followers. It's probably about 3 million now. And if you look at his tweet, it said, my son and wife pregnant, they send me this site. And if you click on the link, you get to a site saying that it can cause miscarriage. Now, this was the exact opposite advice that was being given at the time by all the medical authorities. So this single person was telling all his followers to be careful about these new drugs and these vaccines. And this was part of a wider phenomenon of people being scared of these vaccines and this crisis. And this is not a marginal phenomenon. If you think about the scale these networks have reached, Facebook reaches over 1.3 billion people, and it's almost reached saturation in the Western world. And I'll actually just do a little poll. How many people here are on Facebook? Okay, who's not on Facebook? So we got like about 3 or 4%. This is now a mass media. It's actually more effective to reach a large segment of the population than pretty much any other media. And you cannot reach people the way Facebook allows you to reach people through traditional media, through TV, or through any other channel. And adults are using social media increasingly. And the thing about these trends, these are just numbers, but every time you look at them, they grow. And so there's a continuous growth in every sector. YouTube has 68 hours of video uploaded every minute. It just sounds completely insane, but what you have is an incredible number of stories being told on these channels. Now, this boils down to you, the individual. And Time chose you as Person of the Year in 2007. Normally, Time magazine takes a celebrity, an actor, a politician, that represents that year. And that year in particular, which was a kind of really crux year, they decided that the individual was now the personality of the year. And this says something very powerful, which is that individuals, through the use of these channels, have gained tremendous power. They have this ability that just never existed before to reach the entire world with their message. And it's true of everyone. I mean, I'm staying here in Edmonton at the Matrix Hotel. Who knows the Matrix Hotel? Wow, so it's a well-established hotel. And you know what you do before when you go to a hotel? Do you check who checks on Booking or TripAdvisor before they go on holiday? So yeah, about 90% of the room. So what we have is a place that we go to, and we read people's reviews. So I checked the review. These were the top ones, by the way. I was just choosing randomly. The walls in the bathroom are dirty, need to be cleaned. Not the case in my room, I'm fine, so I'm okay with them. But when you read that, you always think, my God, is this true? And the reality is that, you know, it doesn't matter what the company website says. You're going to believe or you're going to be challenged by these kind of comments. This is where communication happens nowadays. This is what we believe or what we're interested in. And by the way, for those of you who followed the news, there was some really bizarre story yesterday which is a hotel finds a couple for writing a bad review. This is, if you check it out on the BBC. So actually, the couple had had a terrible experience in this hotel, wrote that it was really a dump, and the hotel sent them a £100 fine, saying that it was written in their terms and conditions that you're not allowed to write bad reviews on TripAdvisor. Now, this obviously became a huge story. They got on the news, they had to apologize, refund the money, and probably got the worst publicity any hotel has ever got in the history of the hotel industry. But I still think it's quite interesting. So next time, read the fine print, but I don't think they can do much about it. Now, what's interesting about these new channels is that they dominate the way we work. And I'll also check how many of you are on Twitter. Okay, so if you want to tweet about this, it's #Hyperthinking, and feel free to spread the word. There's a lot of conversation, by the way, around this trip and different conversations, so please join in. Now, what we find is that we have these new channels, and there's one institution that seems to be allergic to change, and that's the institution that is supposed to prepare us for the 21st century. It's our school system, our education system. Now, if you look at this picture, what you see is something that looks a lot like school today. Kids sitting in rows, looking at a teacher who gives them instructions, tells them what to do, tells them what to think, and essentially training them to become factory workers in the industrial age. That's why school was designed in the first place. And you wanted people who could read and write, you wanted people who could follow instructions, and you wanted to grade them by numbers. You know, you're an 8, you're a 9, you're a 3, you're a 4. It sounds very organized, very industrial. But the age we live in today is completely different. But we don't learn at school how to use Google, how to interact with Facebook, how to understand this new world that is the world that matters to us most. So there's something strange about this, and we all need to think about how this is going to affect us. And what we found is that companies or individuals who were most successful in this new world were the ones who didn't have the most money, the best software, or the most resources, but the right mindset. And that's what we were looking at. It's what is the mindset that we need to be successful? And the scary thing is that changing your mindset is actually hard to do. We're not wired to enjoy change. We instinctively feel uncomfortable when we don't understand what's going to happen, and we don't understand the changes that we're facing. And I spoke to someone at a TED conference. How many of you know about TED? If you can put up your hands. Okay, I don't need to explain what TED is. So I was at a TED conference, and I met a former jihadist called Maajid Nawaz. He made a TED talk, and he talked about his conversion from being a jihadist radical, doing communication for fundamentalist organizations, to being a pro-liberal democracy advocate. And so I went up to him after, and I had a chat. I sat with him. He looked a bit intense, so I was kind of like a little nervous. And I said, how was that change for you? What happened? Because that was a change of mindset, if you want one. And he actually had gone to prison and undergone very deep, difficult personal circumstances. But he described it as if the brain is a silk veil, and you put it on a bed of thorns, and you kind of pull it, and it rips to shreds. That was the feeling he had when he went through this change of mindset, an incredibly painful change in his notion of identity, in the idea of who he was. Now, we don't all have to go through such a painful change of mindset, but we need to adapt to a new age. And in our work and in our personal lives, we found that we needed to capture this change and try to describe it. And for that, I described this concept, this new word that I call hyperthinking. So I chose this word because it reminded us of the hyperlinks that make up our digital world. And the idea was we need a new thinking for the age of hyperlinks, for the digital age. So I picked the word hyperthinking because nobody else seemed to use it at the time, and I thought it sounded quite memorable, and I thought it sounded cool. So I started with that, and then I thought, okay, what are the key attributes? What are the elements that we need to think about in order to be successful in this new environment of constant change? And I captured 4 different dimensions that I think help us to understand what it is that we need to do. And the first one, which is actually also my favorite, is called hypershifting. And the idea is that we all see the world through a unique pair of glasses. It's our own perception, and we're stuck behind that perception until we change our glasses, and I'll now demonstrate. So if you remove your glasses and you change your perception, and you replace them with new ones, you see it's already working. You get a shift of perspective, you get a shift of paradigm. And that's what we need to do. We need to learn how to shift our perspective, to shift our paradigm, to challenge our preconceptions. And when it comes to communication and marketing, there's a great book by Seth Godin called All Marketeers Are Liars. That kind of captures what consumers traditionally think about old way advertising. They basically believe that every company is going to say that their products are great, that people are great, they're very happy all the time, and everything's fine. And we all know that that's not how the real world works. And if you go to the web and you read reviews, suddenly you see something that looks a lot more like the messy real world we live in. Now, coming back to the vaccine story, we had worked on this research for H1N1, and we found that there was a gap and a need to engage in conversation because the anti-vaccine stories were dominating the web. So we created a platform called Vaccines Today, where we engage doctors, experts, and parents in the conversation of vaccines, rather than let the anti-vaccine story spread. Because a lot of the time people believed that essentially, if you go there, you're at risk of being attacked. And the traditional communication approach was publish facts, statistics. We have all these studies that show that vaccines are safe, so how come people don't believe us? Because there wasn't the emotional, and there wasn't the conversation of real people. And there was one father called Danny, and I met him at a conference. We interviewed him for Vaccines Today, and he had a very moving stories to tell. Actually, his daughter, when she was born, had whooping cough, and after a few weeks, tragically, she died. And he hadn't vaccinated her. And he realized that it was because of the lack of information, the lack of understanding, and it devastated him and his family. But then he decided to go out and speak about this and tell people that it really matters to vaccinate. It's not just something crazy people do. It makes a difference to your life or death. And so he and many other people got into this conversation and started telling this story of vaccines. And I think it really shows how these things can change when you bring people into the conversation and engage. Now, an interesting organization that has shifted its paradigm is TED. And you all heard about TED, and you probably heard about TED through their videos. They have videos that attract millions of people. But TED was not a video organization originally. It was a conference that took place in the US once a year, and it attracted the kind of elite of Silicon Valley and technology to exchange ideas. And then Chris Anderson, the new curator, came along and decided to shift the model. He said, I will give for free all our talks online. And people said, this is crazy. How are we going to make money? They charge $5,000 for people to attend the conferences. And yet, it worked. And I'll share my personal experience, which is actually a near-death experience witnessed by over 2 million people at a TED conference. So this was my moment of fame. I was on camera, viewed by 2 million, actually it's like 3 or 4 million now. And you know, the reason I show you this, not just because I think it's funny, is because I was actually completely engrossed in this bird, and I was filming it like hundreds of people in the conference. And why were we filming it? Because we thought this is a great story, and I want to show everyone that I was there, and I want to share this online. So you're in a conference, but you're thinking, the cool thing about this conference is that it exists online, and that so many people are part of this story. So I was so absorbed that I actually didn't see it kind of flying almost into me, and the guy just behind me caught it at the last minute, so I'm forever grateful. The other shift that Chris Anderson did was TEDx. Have you heard about TEDx? So there's a TEDx in Edmonton. And again, what did he do? He said, well, there are millions of people out there who love TED, but they can't afford to come to our conferences, and you know, they want to do more than just watch the video. They want to organize something. So he said, let's give them the brand, TEDx, free of charge. They can organize conferences, and you know, they just do what they believe is connected to our brand. And suddenly, thousands of people are organizing TEDx conferences. And yet still, people said, you're crazy, you're going to undermine the business model. And yet it worked. It attracted even more people to TED. We're involved in the organization of TEDx Brussels, which is one of the biggest TEDx's in the world. It has over 2,000 people. We have people like Steve Wozniak as some of the core speakers. And he actually even got Hyperthinking, so you can see that he's already signed up to the concept. And there's another area where communication is being challenged, and this was actually the conference title of IABC's European conference called Eurocom, which we call Disruptive Communication for Disruptive Times, because essentially we're looking at how all these things were changing, and we were looking at how the paradigm of communication is shifting. Now, with all these changes, we need to take a new approach to learning, and I call this hyperlearning, the second dimension of hyperthinking. And hyperlearning is really two simple ideas. The first one is that we all need to become self-learners. We can't depend on school, university, traditional structures to educate us, because education to adapt to the constant changes around us is too slow. So the core skill we all need to acquire as fast as possible is the ability to learn by ourselves. But the great thing about now is that it's become possible like never before. There's a movement called the MOOCs. Has anyone heard about the word MOOC? This is a bigger sample than usual. I think we've had the low sample. So can somebody tell me what a MOOC stands for?
Massive Open Online Course.
Very good. Indeed, and that movement started a couple of years ago, and it's probably one of the most disruptive and most interesting movements that happen in education. Universities around the world are putting their courses online for free. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you just go online, you check things like Coursera, and you join a course. It's free, and thousands of people are joining them. And I joined a course in Stanford on creativity, and it was a fantastic experience. I created a hyperthinking team, so you create your own team, and 25 people from all over the world. You see, from Ireland, the US, California, Uruguay, were all part of the team. And together, we had to brainstorm, we had to come up with new ideas, we followed certain methodologies, and it was a really engaged period. This is a little video we produced as part of an assignment. Now, I don't expect you to be impressed by the production quality of the video, but this was done by 20 people who didn't know each other, had never worked together, didn't work on the same time zone, and just collaborated in order to learn. So somebody wrote the storyboard, somebody else put the screenshots together, somebody else put the music in the back, and all that to create an assignment that was then peer-reviewed by hundreds of students in this particular course. And it was really emotionally engaging, so it was a great learning experience. So I believe that these tools are allowing us to learn in a completely different way. And you have videos like TED Ed, you have Khan Academy, you have MIT OpenCourseWare, so it's really all over the web, and you have all sorts of different places from which you can learn. The second part of hyperlearning is that we need to learn to be creative. That means that we can no longer take for granted the idea that creativity is something that belongs to the selected few, and that, most of us are taught at school that the smart people are the ones who do well at maths or science. There's a kind of inherent bias towards certain kind of intelligence. That's where you get your high marks. I mean, how many times do you get high marks for creativity at school? Not very often. How many people here consider themselves very creative? That's a good room. That's like, you're a very good room. Congratulations. So what you have actually in a lot of environments is people being nervous about expressing themselves as being creative, because they were taught at school that this is not what you get rewarded for. This is something that belongs to the artists or the naturally creative. But what we need to recognize is that creativity is a core skill, and it's a skill that we need. If we're going to face unpredictable futures with new models, new challenges, we need to learn creativity, and creativity can be taught by practicing certain tools. My two favorite tools are mind maps, which allow you to visualize information in a certain way, and thinking hats, a tool invented by Edward de Bono, founder of the inventor of lateral thinking. And it's a very simple technique that allows you to look at a problem through different perspectives. How many people here heard about the thinking hats? Wow, what a crowd. Congratulations. I just deserve a good round of applause, so you can please join me in. Thank you. Sorry. I actually, most of the time, to be honest, I get to 10% or something like that. So, and Cheryl will be my witness that for actually the last 15 presentations, actually, I think we had very low rates. So it's quite an unusual crowd. So you're definitely in the hyperthinking zone. The third dimension of hyperthinking is to hyperlink, and that's using your digital networks, understanding how powerful they are, and deliberately trying to get better at using them. And I don't mean watching cats on YouTube and liking things on Facebook. I mean truly engaging, looking at how these tools might make a huge difference, and connecting things that look like they might not be connecting, making those hyperlinks that generate insights and creativity, embracing your networks, and looking at how these new organizations change the rule. Look at Wikipedia. If you think about Wikipedia, it's an organization where thousands of people work together for free and create content with no clear hierarchy, and yet it creates very interesting and powerful knowledge. And if you had asked anyone before Wikipedia existed if this was possible, they would have said, of course not. It doesn't make any sense. Why would people spend so much time doing something for free, and how is it ever going to work? And yet it works. Now, we don't fully understand why, but we need to recognize that these things exist and that they change the rules. And the final dimension of hyperthinking is hyperacting. Now, that doesn't mean attention deficit disorder. So I get to redefine this. It actually means that having a good idea isn't enough. The real challenge is to put that idea in practice, to make it happen. So we need to be innovators and creators, but we also need to take those ideas and try them out in the real world. And that means adapting our ideas and making mistakes, because without failure, new ideas simply can't come to life. So we need to learn to be comfortable with making mistakes and with failure. And we need to experiment, because that experimentation will allow us to understand things much better. So to recap the 4 dimensions of hyperthinking, and there will be a test at the end of this session. It's hypershifting, to shift paradigm. Hyperlearning, which is to become creative and to become a self-learner. Hyperlinking, which is using your digital connections. And hyperacting, which is putting your ideas in practice and learning through trial and error. Now, I'd like to share 7 things that you can do to start hyperthinking right now. And by the way, I think a lot of you are already hyperthinkers without having a word to describe it. A lot of us intuitively understand that these things are important, but we don't quite know why. And the idea is that once you have a language, you can actually share it with people, and you can get better at focusing on it. And a word is actually a very powerful tool, because once I say the word hyperthinking, it's very hard for you to take it out of your mind. So you've already been infected right now. So the first step is to think different. And by that I mean challenge your preconceptions, challenge your paradigms. Most of the things you think are absolutely true are wrong. And the same for me, by the way. And in 6 months' time, your preconceived ideas will be challenged. And that's fine, but you need to recognize that and be able to change and embrace new perspective. Number 2, start self-learning every day. Now, self-learning is a very easy idea to understand, more difficult idea to put in practice. So make time to learn new things. Use this technology to join these online courses, to listen to audiobooks, to exercise your brain, whatever your age and whatever the stage in your life you are, because I believe this is a skill you have to take with you every single day of your life, and you have to make those 10 minutes available however busy you are. And what you'll notice is that most of the great thinkers and creators of our time were self-learners. If you look at the Benjamin Franklins, Theodore Roosevelt, people like Bill Gates, they spend time every day learning something that has nothing to do with their work because they are passionate. And I think we all need to learn to turn these into habits. Number 3, make new connections. Tonight, you're sitting with a network of hyperthinkers, a great opportunity to share ideas, to share your own interpretations. You can meet everyone digitally. I'll travel back to Brussels tomorrow, but we can stay connected. We can keep talking on Twitter. We can keep talking through social networks. So we can reach people anywhere in the world, exchange ideas, and share concepts. Learn to make more mistakes. Don't be afraid of getting it wrong, because that's the only way you can do interesting work and you can try new things. And sometimes that means to destroy and rebuild. When you're in an organization, we find this in communication, that the traditional structures don't make any sense. You have PR on the one hand, you have advertising, marketing, brand, and sometimes social media somewhere in the basement. This structure doesn't make any sense. The world we live in today is one where information travels across all different departments. So we need to look at how this needs to be organized, rather than accept that it's always been a certain way. Number 5, you can be the change you want to see in the world. Now, I love the Gandhi quote, but I actually think it really resonates with every one of us. A lot of people tell me, oh, but my organization is too conservative, they're never going to do that. Well, start by changing yourself, and you'll be surprised by the kind of change you can bring to your organization. If you help them understand what these challenges are and show them that it's possible to try new things, to do things differently. And number 7, enjoy the ride, because whether you like this or not, it's happening. So you might as well embrace it, because it's the way the future looks. Now I want to come back to my conversation about Coney. I had a friend, I still have a friend, called Matt Green. I met him when I was at Oxford, and he was a student journalist, and he became a journalist for Reuters, BBC, Financial Times, and he likes to travel the world in dangerous places. As you can see, he seems to kind of land at the time and place where he's probably most likely to be bombed or kidnapped. I don't know why he does that, but he likes doing that. And when I was looking at the Coney story, I was connected with him in Facebook. It was somewhere, I think, in Islamabad. And I discovered that actually he had written a book on Coney. And he was one of the few Western journalists who had actually met with Coney. He spent a year in Africa trying to find Coney, and eventually had a kind of 15-minute meeting. Again, he has a death wish. I don't understand it, but that's how some people roll. And I said to him, look, I've heard about this story. My kids are asking me, and I feel I have to kind of go through this process. So what do you think? Should I support them or not? And he told me, look, this is where I'm at. And by the way, you can read one of my articles in the FT. But the basic story is, Invisible Children is clearly slightly nebulous organization. And it's not clear that the arguments they make are not an oversimplification of the problem. Of course, there are local problems that are much more complex. However, Joseph Kony is a kidnapper and a murderer, and that is without any doubt. And the fact that their campaign brought his attention and his name back into the political system is a good thing. So even if it's not a perfect world we live in, on balance, this is probably a good thing. So I decided to buy the t-shirt, which you can see here, and symbolically support, this is slacktivism, so you can do it just by buying a t-shirt. And finally, I want to return to London, to those riots. Now, a few days after the riots, people came together with broomsticks. And they wanted to show the world that London wasn't just devastated by these riots, but there were people out there who cared and who wanted to clean up the streets of London. And they used the exact same tools that had been used to create the trouble. At some point people were saying, oh, social media is so dangerous, it gets, people go crazy, they come together, they riot. And they said, no, we want to show a different image of the world. This was called the kind of broomstick revolution. And what it shows us all is that these tools are neutral. They don't belong to any political organization. They don't belong to anyone. They belong to you. So if you choose to use them to make a difference, if you apply the right mindset to your challenges, you can make a huge difference and you can change the world. Thank you very much.